Hey,
What's up,
Sam.
guys? You must be Travis.
I am.
Hi, Travis. My name's Sam. It's nice to meet you.
What did
Well,
we
we
want to
talked.
talk about? I remember something about the Book of Mormon.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that was promoted as a topic was um, like our findings on the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon, like what we've sort of studied as far as the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon, where we fall as far as the truth of the Book of Mormon is concerned. And so before that could be established, so Elder Glass um, was in a conversation with Caleb and I before concerning worldview, and so um, that had more to do with like kind of taking a 30,000 foot view, taking a look at like why we believe the things that we believe, kind of thing. And so, in the same vein, I thought, well, maybe truth as a concept would be good to establish so we understand each other. Um, because I don't want to, I don't have any desire to tell people they're wrong or correct their beliefs. I'd rather understand the way I kind of see the way you guys are understanding the concept of truth through your eyes. And I'd invite you to see it through my eyes. And then from that point, we can evaluate on our own whether or not one seems more favorable than the other. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So it just gets a lot better than having this back and forth banter that's useless. Nobody's listening and everybody thinks they're making an epic point. Nobody cares. So um, the uh, the concept of truth, truth is a concept, if you will. Um, what is as far as truth as you understand it, how would you guys define truth?
Um, I mean, so truth is typically bifurcated into two concepts. There's objective truth and then there's subjective truth. So an objective truth would be something that an epistemology like science could touch, where I can say that it is true that I'm sitting here. It is true that we're speaking. Um, it's true that we're human beings. So there's those kinds of truths, and then there are truths with respect to a religious paradigm, which would be more subjective. So those
Is
those
it
things can't be weighed and measured and evaluated aside from argument and opinion.
could I have you ever heard of a falsifiable and unfalsifiable
Yeah.
statement?
Mm-hmm.
So would that be kind of the same thing? Like an objective truth would be a falsifiable statement versus a subjective truth is a non-falsifiable statement,
Right.
meaning
Yeah.
that
I mean, I sure.
because sometimes subjective truth sounds like relative truth. I hate that. It's like this
Well, I
concept that
mean, it would be. I mean, to a degree, that's effectively what it is. Religious truths would be relative, subjective. The individual holding to those truths would believe they're objective from their specific perspective, but there's no way to
okay,
prove them in that respect.
okay, cool. So obviously the subject that we would be getting into would be specifically subjective truth. Does that agree? Is that
Right, yeah. So
we all?
claims, for example, that the Bible is scripture
Mhm.
or that it's the quote word of God or something like that are going to be subjective claims.
Gotcha. And you would say that for the same for the Book of Mormon.
I would say that for any religious claim.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, well that makes sense. how does one come to a subjective truth in your worldview?
Well, usually you'll learn about the principles associated with the subjective truth. There can be some degree of experimentation, and then most of those are going to be anecdotal experiences predicated on some kind of emotive response that you would call God.
If they can be anecdotal or they can be almost testable, what makes that non-subjective? Wouldn't that be a little more objective if there were
I mean, the
proof?
person perceiving it would be objective, would believe it's objective, but it would be objective to the person, but it wouldn't be actually truly objective. So, um, a person might pray, and as a result of experiences with prayer, they would come to some kind of a faith in the principle of prayer. But that doesn't mean that they're actually talking to some unknown or unseen being. There's no way to verify that. So arguments could be made that whatever effects come from prayer are simply coincidental, or you can't do any kind of studying on prayer because prayer doesn't have measurable, verifiable results that demonstrate that prayer is actually something that influences the natural world around you. So people say, I prayed and this happened, and that was God interacting with me, or I received an answer to my prayer based on things that happened in my life. And you're taking events and patterns and you're drawing conclusions, but there's no way to scientifically measure or determine that prayer actually works other than just within the minds of the people who pray and their experiences with it.
That's fair. That's really fair. Actually, it's pretty well thought out. Um, the so and I would agree. I agree with that. I agree with that. That I so far as I agree with that. I mean, I think it's interesting. The idea of subjective truth is certainly a anthrocentric concept, right? If truth is objective, truth is true no matter what. It doesn't, it's just a statement of what is, right? So the origin of the universe is a good example. I can't prove that the universe had an origin, or I can't prove objectively by what means it's done. I have to take the creation of the world account of Genesis 1 and 2 by faith, and so I can't possibly prove that. Would you say that there are elements because the subject was over the Book of Mormon, so I'm kind of curious about this. What are there any elements of the Book of Mormon that are objective truth,
Um,
like the categories of
Certainly, I mean, the fact that the book exists, the fact that it's a narrative has a narrative structure, the fact that it has Semitic components that reflect a Hebrew influence on the text, the fact that it does have some accounts of specific places that actually existed, but largely because of the nature of the Book of Mormon, objective verification for the text itself would be almost impossible to arrive at.
okay. Okay. Yeah, that was pretty smartsy fartsy.
That
He's wearing
was.
glasses. I thought he might have been smart, but he really is smart. That's good. So it's okay. Um, so let's see. I don't disagree with that. So when it comes to um, and I'm not referring to necessarily what are objective truths we can gather from the book itself, right? It was more on the line of the latter part that you said, right? It maybe describes lands that we can verify that existed and that
Right,
sort of thing.
right.
The how do you? It's interesting that you put truth. I've never heard somebody put a category of truth as being subjective before. Um, Webster's dictionary defines truth as a statement which agrees with reality.
Right.
So,
And so I pray, things happen. The prayer caused the things that happen are not inconsistent with reality. that you're drawing causation between two events doesn't mean that those two events aren't real and that the things that you're purporting happened. But certainly the connection between an event occurring and the divine, that's a belief that you have. That belief is real. So,
Sure.
but whether or not your belief in a being that you can't measure, weigh, or see, I mean, I that's the subjective element of it. Religious claims all are predicated on the idea that there's some person or thing up there in the sky that's controlling the universe.
Sure. Yeah.
If it was
So,
objective, there wouldn't be atheists.
well, yeah, I don't know about that. I think I think the I think atheism masquerades as claiming materialism as their only source and guide for all reality. And they operate with a lot of assumptions that go beyond materialism to believe what they believe. Um,
The Latter-day Saints are largely materialists, so
well, I don't know about that. I think the uh,
I do. It's our theology.
materialists. What do you mean? Can
Mhm.
you describe what you mean by materialist? Because when I say materialism, I'm talking about the only thing that exists is matter,
Right. That's LDS theology.
matter and energy. Um,
Right. Yeah, that's LDS theology.
really,
Right. That's in the Doctrine and Covenants.
I didn't know that.
All spiritual things are matter in some form. The matter itself
Oh,
is more refined. So yeah, that's not just in my opinion. That's actually the
dude, yeah,
doctrine of the church.
that's super interesting. So
So God is
you know,
made of stuff. He's not immaterial.
right. I thought, and I was under the presumption, tell me, correct me if I'm wrong, that you believed at one point you were spirit and you were made flesh. Is that not
Right. But
right? Is that,
spirit is matter. Spirit is a material substance, and so is our bodies.
oh,
We don't believe spirits are
so
immaterial.
interesting.
Now, what
What
kind of matter and what that means, we don't know that. We don't know, but
It's interesting though, isn't it? I mean, I've never heard that before. I've never
it,
heard
it's in
that.
it's in the Doctrine and Covenants, and it's in the Pearl of Great Price, so it's in our scriptures.
I'm sure it is. I mean, I'm not well antiquated with the doctrines and covenants and the pearl of great price, so I don't. It is interesting though.
That's why we believe God has a body.
Mm,
The Book of Mormon has an account of the premortal Christ interacting with humans on a material level. So
okay.
there's no reason to believe that spirit isn't some form of matter. It's not nothing.
Why is it necessary to come to Earth? Why couldn't we just be given bodies in heaven?
We came to Earth to become like God, and one of the steps to becoming like God is to receive a mortal body, have a mortal experience, and to be resurrected.
What
And we
does
do that
mortal mean?
because
What does mortal mean?
well, I'm currently mortal. My body's going to die.
So so something that can die.
Right. Yeah. So
Okay,
this material body that you see before you will die.
gotcha.
And for some reason, that's something that God requires us to interact with. And the reason being is that He has done that. So
Gotcha. Interesting. That's fascinating. I did not know that. I live in, you're
well,
teaching me all kinds of
that's the
stuff.
basic principle of Christianity. So I had
What's
to
that?
that God became flesh and had a mortal experience, and He died and returned to a physical body. That's a foundational doctrine of Christianity.
It said return to a physical body?
Right. Jesus raised His body.
Oh, returned in a physical body.
Yeah, He has a body of flesh and bone currently.
Yeah. And we believe that. We don't believe anybody else does it.
But
Nobody
I'm
else
going to do. I'm going
right.
to do
No,
that because that's what the resurrection is.
right. What I mean is this is our perspective, not your perspective. But in our perspective, we believe the only person who's ever come from heaven to earth is Christ. And so the differentiation there being obviously that um, we are we originated on earth. We are from earth. We are of the earth. Our name is dirt, and we'll go back to the dirt. Save the grace of God, which allows us into an adoption into the family of God, which is remarkable. Remarkable. Um,
And what would
the
be the purpose for which God did that?
uh, the
What's
purpose
the
for which
purpose of
God did what?
what's the purpose in having us go through that experience?
Oh, the human perspective. What is the
Right.
purpose of humans doing that?
Yeah, why do we do that? Why are we created on earth and die and resurrect?
Right. So, and I appreciate the question. Um, so, the purpose of our very being is spelled out to us in Genesis, and that is that first of all, we were originally created to um, multiply on the earth, to subdue the earth, to be sovereign over God's creative work on earth. And so we were, in essence, to uh, be as God is over the cosmos. We were to be here on earth, uh, subduing and existing as He is, therefore being in His image. Um, and so now death necessarily wasn't a part of the plan. That's something that He warned us would occur if we diverged from His one and only command in the garden, which was not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So once we did that, we had death to expect because of it. And one of the marks of that was that Satan tells Eve, "Hey, you eat of the fruit, you're going to be as God is, knowing good and evil." Right? And so the idea of knowing good and evil to us sounds, in our vernacular, it it doesn't necessarily mean to know the difference between good and evil. They knew what the difference was. They knew they shouldn't do one thing and they should do another. And it wasn't like they had downloaded all this carnal information, this terrible, nasty stuff, as if God does. It says when they did eat of it, God says, now they know good and evil as we do, meaning that it's not necessarily distinguishing between good and evil as it is determining good and evil. Man began to decide what was good and evil. From that moment, he believed he could determine it. And actually, the case in point is she takes the fruit. She knew she wasn't supposed to. She decided it was good to take the fruit when God had clearly said that it was wrong to take the fruit. So from that point on, we have death. So death is a consequence of our decision. Um, but God, in His grace, has redeemed us, gives us opportunity to be redeemed from death by faith in His salvation. So that's the perspective.
Right, that's a completely different reading of the Genesis account that I'm familiar with. I'm not sure where you got most of the information that you just
Which
conveyed.
part?
So, for example, there were more than one commandment given to Adam and Eve. There was very few commandments, if any, given to Eve directly because of the order of creation. The fact
Right.
is that yeah, there's no mention of Satan being in the garden. It's a serpent. So I don't know where that came from.
Well, that comes from the
Um,
New Testament. John the Apostle calls Satan the serpent of old.
we calls him a serpent, but he does that old serpent, yeah, the devil, but he doesn't
Right.
identify him as the serpent in Genesis. That's just you connecting dots that aren't
Oh, so
actually
you don't believe
connected.
that wasn't Satan?
Right, but the biblical texts don't reflect that. We believe things like that because we believe them based on modern and additional revelation. But I assume that you believe in sola scriptura.
I do. I do.
Right, so you wouldn't have any external
So
source for that.
so are you correcting my theology now?
No, I'm just saying that your theology is predicated on a reading of the biblical text. That a lot
So
of the
you
things that you said are not in the Genesis account.
right. Well, Travis, this is actually something I wanted to avoid, right? I promise you, I'm not going to correct your beliefs. I'm not going to correct you. I'm not going to tell you
I'm
you're wrong. I'm not going to do anything to that effect. I want to know your perspective, Travis. You don't have to go polemic. Okay? Don't worry.
well.
I'm
Let me ask you this, Sam. What's the purpose of this discussion?
Well, the purpose of the discussion, as I understand it, is it helps us all to understand one another and to understand our worldviews, right? So the purpose of understanding a worldview is that you can weigh it out, and you can kind of weigh out, okay, does this worldview seem to represent my world, or does it only represent the world that I want? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, but that would require that I disagree with you and demonstrate why I disagree with you. And if
No,
you if you
you don't have to disagree with me. Um, so in other words, I know it takes some restraint, but if you don't have to disagree with me. In fact, if you're what I want, and we can disagree. If you want to have a debate, we can have a debate. That's a completely different thing. But those usually get contentious. We get deadlocked on something silly,
why does
like
it
a
well why would it
word.
have to be a debate? You can have a discussion where you disagree. That doesn't have to be debate.
Well, sure. I suppose that's true. Um, the the idea of uh, of
Well,
what you'd
so
like
do
to
you want me
do.
to just say what Latter-day Saints believe and not give any reasons for that? Is that the
No, no, no. I'm happy. I want to hear the reasons for it, and I ask clarifying questions to understand the reasons for it.
well, and it would be part
Yeah,
of
go ahead.
that the whole idea of objective versus subjective, for example, right? So um, the Genesis account, for example, has words on a page. Those words mean things, and if you're drawing inferences or conclusions from the words that the words don't support, then that would be you drawing a subjective idea out of a text that objectively doesn't support those ideas. And that was my point. Um, so for example, there's no objective indication in any of the biblical texts that the serpent is Satan. You can believe
Well,
that he is.
except for the serpent, Satan is called the serpent of old, meaning that is there any other serpent you can think of in the Bible?
But that's the thing is that I don't view the Bible as one text. It's a collection of separate texts. And to conclude that John was saying that old serpent, the devil, and saying a Greek indication that he is a serpent in some way, it means that he's the serpent from the Genesis text. There's nothing that connects those. You can connect them if you choose to do that, but there's nothing that would mean that that's a connection. He doesn't indicate that this
So
is the serpent from Genesis.
okay, so that's okay if that's what you want to believe, but you
But
don't
it's not
have
a
to tell.
belief. See that,
No, no, no,
but see
no.
that
Hold
that
on,
would be an
Travis.
example of an objective statement.
Right. What I'm saying is, you have certain like some kind of you believe in sola scriptura, so you believe I should interpret the Bible according to how you think sola scriptura should work, right? So whatever that is, and whatever you are trained to believe, don't worry. You don't have to correct the way I view the serpent in the Old Testament. You can disagree with me if you want. You can even say, I don't think this guy's operating on sola scriptura, because otherwise he wouldn't have said Satan, he would have said the devil. And the reality is, this really isn't a point that we have to sit here and be high centered on for a long time, do we? Can we move on to
Well,
something
no.
else? I mean,
Well, I
this
mean,
isn't like a
I'd asked you about why you believe that man exists,
right.
and honestly, the answer that you gave doesn't really make sense. So that's what I was
That's
getting at.
okay. I
So,
mean, right. Okay. So if you're just wanting clarification, let's talk about what parts of what I said seemed unclear and
and
get some clarification.
That's what I was trying to do.
So
So,
yeah, clarification wise, yes, I believe Satan is the
and
serpent.
that would require that I tell you that the things that you stated in the text are not in the text, and that's why I didn't understand them that way because I don't see them in the text. So, and if I'm,
Would you rather we read it?
we can, sure.
Okay.
What
So
version of the Bible are you using?
I'm using the English Standard Version.
Okay. So I usually use the NRSV.
Okay. Let's see. And I'm just referring to the statements on the creation of man in chapter 1, verse 26. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Let them have
Okay.
dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heaven, over the livestock, over the the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So the
And when it
purpose,
says, "Let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness," what does that mean?
well, so let's take a look at man. Okay, first of all, in verse 8, man is a word that it means earth. Okay, it's dirt.
I'm sorry.
Man means dirt. It's the word for earth in Hebrew is Adamai.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so Adam is just simply dirt. It's or earthling, if you will. Um, so it's certainly humankind is probably the most politically correct term for today. We don't even say man because it sounds like you're saying males. Um, but
I
the word
use
there,
the NRSV because it was translated by Bruce Metzger and his team, so that's why I use it because it's going to be a more, I mean, it's going to be a more consistent translation with what the meaning of the Hebrew is. But um,
well,
I
sure,
don't read Hebrew, so
yeah. So um, yeah, he says in our image after our likeness. So in our image and after our likeness, okay, is means that unlike any other creature, unlike the birds of the heavens, the beasts of the field, the creeping things, this creature was going to resemble God, was going to be as God is, or like God, right?
right.
So, um,
And does that mean also in appearance, physical
well,
characteristics?
we get a if we're just going with scripture, we're going to get a description in that, like God, right? He's going to have dominion over the fish and the sea, right? And of the birds of the heavens, of the livestock of the earth.
Right.
Um, and so the reason I say that is because you have that and you have bookended, so God created. In other words, he completed it. He's done. He created man in his own image, in the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. So if the image of God is known basically as what God is, right? What God is from the text, we can see that God is the ruler of all heavens and earth. And so man is a ruler in that own right, we would say, by what the text warrants is his role or the way he is. So the
Right.
way man is the way God is.
Okay. Yeah. And see, Latter-day Saints, when we read the Bible, we just say, "And God said, let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness." So we would just conclude that that means humans look like God and we have characteristics of God.
Oh, like they look like him?
Right. So God's in the biblical text, God's an anthropomorphic being. So humans were created in the way that we are because that's what God looks like.
Well, okay, so if that's interesting because you just said God is an anthropomorphic being.
Well,
That would
we're yeah. So he's got a body and
oh,
he
okay.
looks
So
like
in
a
other
human. He
words,
looks like we look like this because he looks like this.
um, okay, so in one sense, it's you're trying to be more literal, but that certainly
Yeah,
is dirty.
I don't really have any choice because I don't. Yeah, I'm just reading what the text says, so I don't really have any choice but to be literal.
Well, a lot of people before 1830 didn't take it that way. So obviously, it's not as though it's just the most normal, rational thing to do is to come to a conclusion that God is God has a body, right?
A lot of Christians before 1830 didn't take it that way because Christian doctrine had developed quite differently. But
Right. But what
prior
I'm
to
saying
that,
is what you're basically saying that I have to take it that way because that's what I'm reading. When my point is that's not a conclusion that nobody else really makes that conclusion is also being I think you would agree that that conclusion is also being made based on theology, like the theology you're taught, like that.
why is that?
Um, why is that? Well, because the well, first of all, you can't simply divorce. You can if you want, but you can't divorce your um, to say something's like that. Like, well, we would just conclude that it's. I'm just interested in what you're thinking about this. Let me just say it this way. It looks like what you're saying is the only conclusion you can draw from that, based on what you're reading, is that God is has a body of flesh and blood.
No, God is in form like a man. It doesn't necessarily say that he has a body of flesh and bone or flesh and blood or whatever. I mean, the text doesn't say that. It just says that we look like God. So I would imagine that God looks like a human being.
That we look like God?
Yeah, we're in his image and his likeness.
So I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Right. Okay. Well, that's different,
I
isn't
know
it?
when I was 10 and I first read the Bible, that's what I came away with.
Okay. So the uh
I've
the
actually talked I've talked to lots of, well, so for example, and then you read into the New Testament, Jesus is God. God looks like a human being. He resurrects, he has a body of flesh and bone. So if you want to look at it from that perspective, God has a face, a back, arms, legs. He's got body parts throughout the biblical texts. Ancient people depicted gods as being anthropomorphic. So the idea that God was not anthropomorphic is actually a relatively new invention.
relatively new invention.
Right.
Interesting. The so um the I've never heard that before. So
People in the ancient worlds viewed their gods as, I mean,
well, we
you
know
must be
that
familiar with, yeah.
because pagan people have to form a god that they looks like them, right? So
Well, and the ancient Israelites also, with the other gods that they worshipped, viewed them as being anthropomorphic. I mean, God is depicted in ancient sculptures in Semitic cultures throughout the Middle East in as being a being with legs and arms and body, and he's got feet, and that's how they understood it.
I don't think that's true. I mean, with just a biblical account in itself, you have God dwelling with his people in a ark. The Shekinah glory of God dwells within, you know what I mean? It comes in and meets the priest there. And so you don't have any, I mean, other than God appearing anthropomorphically, he certainly does that. He does that with Abraham in one form. He certainly appears to Moses in another form. He appears to Moses in a third form in the burning bush.
What do you
Uh,
mean in a third form in the burning bush?
well, the burning bush, but he came in the form of a burning bush. Like he just,
Well, there's a person in the bush in Exodus. There's an actual being. There's a man in the bush talking
oh,
to him.
there's a man in the bush.
Yeah, in Genesis,
Are you sure about that? You mean Exodus?
pretty sure. Exodus, I think.
Is Moses encountering a bush that is burning, but it doesn't consume the bush?
I seem to recall that
There's a man
that's.
in there that's new to me.
Yeah, I seem to recall that there is. I could be mistaken.
It's okay. It would be new information. It would be very, very new information.
Yeah, it's verse 2.
Burning bush. All right.
Exodus 3, verse 2. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flame of fire out of the bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. Then Moses said, I turned aside and looked to the bush, and see, why is the bush not burned? When the Lord saw that he had turned aside, God called to him out of the bush. So the malach, the messenger of God in the bush, is a theophany. It's a image bearer, or it's God. Most scholars in Hebrew believe that it's actually God, but it says in verse 4 that it's God who calls to him out of the bush. So there's an actual image of a man in the bush.
It doesn't say
He's
that.
not just talking. Okay.
Like we're just gonna go with the words, right? All we're
Right.
seeing is the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire
Right. And then verse
out of the
4
midst of
says,
the bush.
when the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses, and he said, here am I. So the conclusion there is that the being in the bush is God.
Right. So if we're looking at it from my worldview, you have God in the form of flaming fire, right? If he takes the form of flaming fire as a messenger, as a theophany, as you say, and the Lord sees him who sees all things, right? Turn aside to the bush, and he calls to him, Moses, Moses, he's bearing a voice out of fire, which only God can do because you got to understand from our perspective, God is spirit. So we don't believe spirit is a form of matter. Okay. We believe that um, spirit is the very being of God. And so it is mysterious. Um, but for matter to be formed, it would have, well, I'm not going to get into that because that's not even the point. The point here is that God, because he can speak stars into existence, he can speak matter into existence, ex nihilo, if you will. He himself is not born of matter. So for us, it's not a problem with God coming to, for instance, Abraham and the folks of Mamre in the form of three men, or or showing up like this, or being in a cloud, or whatever you want. It's um, the presence of the Lord. Okay, is it doesn't have to be. He's not bound by a physical nature.
Right.
He's
Well,
certainly not bound by a physical body.
yeah, and the difference there would be is that I would disagree. I think that verses 2 and 4 just say that. So you're inferring that that God is the fire of the bush or something like that. But the text doesn't
Right.
necessarily say that. So, but as you stated, a lot of your conclusions are predicated on a theological worldview that you're reading into the text. So, for
And
example,
I'm
creatio ex
okay.
nihilo is not explicated in the biblical
Yep.
text.
Right. So actually, that comes from John 1, right? All things that were created by him. There's nothing that was created that wasn't created by him, right? So um, ex nihilo is out of nothing. Like so, when we say there's nothing that was created that wasn't created by God. Colossians 1 says the same thing, but it refers to Jesus being the creator of all things, right? So all things were created by him, for him, and through him, and in him all things hold together. So uh, all things means all things, and any things outside of all things are no things. So
Right.
so the so that's yes. Is
Yeah,
that
I could give you some book titles that might help with respect to that. So, creatio ex nihilo is not explicated in the biblical text. The created words mean formed and organized, not
yeah?
created in the sense that.
Neither is Trinity. It's not in there,
Well, no,
right?
I'm not concerned about the word Trinity. It's just and whether or not the word creatio ex nihilo is in there, because obviously it's not 'cause it's Latin, but the idea of creation out of nothing is not explicated. So the word created, people often infer that means out of nothing, but their understanding of created would be very much like ours. Because, so for example, somebody created my cell phone. That doesn't mean they made it out of nothing. They made it out of existing material. And
Correct.
so the two Genesis accounts seem to indicate that it's God creating out of existing materials. He's organizing, he's separating, he's dividing.
Well, those words aren't there either, right?
Well, so Genesis chapter 2 is the earlier account of the creation. Chapter 1 is the later account.
How do you know that?
Probably, I, I read a lot of biblical scholarship. Um,
Oh,
the yeah, so
so I mean,
Genesis
but like,
chapters. Well, Genesis chapters 1 and 2 are two separate creation accounts. If you just actually line up the
right,
accounts,
they are. You're
they
right. One is because it's talking about a double creation of man, and obviously man's
right,
got a more detailed creation account.
right,
I
and
don't know that they were
as
written by separate people.
well, they're written at separate times, is based on the
There's no indication they were written at separate times. None. There's actually no real scholarship behind that. The oldest copies of the law that we have, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and those are far beyond the creation account. It's difficult to determine whether something's older based on those merits.
that's why they use paleolography. But um, so the I mean, dating if we dated things just based on text, that doesn't really work because most texts date
No, of
too recently to do that.
course. Right, right.
So they use different methods of dating documents than that. Um, so well, I mean, for example, I mean, the oldest manuscripts you have, the Greek New Testament, don't date to when we actually believe it began its authorship, but we use different methodologies to determine that. The point being is that the understanding of creation out of nothing is not explicated. That something is created that didn't exist. So it's
What,
creation in
so
there.
what's wrong with believing that creation comes ex nihilo?
You can believe that. That's what I'm saying. But
Right.
the biblical texts don't state that. There's nothing in the text that
But it
states
could be, but
God
it could
creates
be
out of
inferred
nothing.
by the, but it could be the inferred by the by the text I use in the New Testament. Maybe not directly stated, but it could be inferred. And that if everything that exists is created, um, then if not, then we have a big pile of sand, right, before all things, and somebody had to organize it, and we don't even know who that was, right? But he got this thing kicked off, and here we are, right? Or God actually just spoke things into existence, like stars, like animals, like the word there
Well,
is that God can simply speak. It's not as though he's doesn't. There's no indication that God is rearranging things. He's just simply speaking, and things are coming into existence. That's actually what you see in Genesis account.
well, let me read this. There's a quote from it's a book called The Bible with and Without Jesus. I don't know if you had any or familiar with that book.
I'm not.
It was written by a Hebrew scholar named Mark Zvi Bretler and a New Testament scholar named Amy G. Levine. She usually goes by AJ, but she states the opening verse of Genesis is one of the Bible's most discussed, most mistranslated, and therefore most misunderstood texts. The well-known King James Version, which translates Genesis 1:1 as "in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth," is incorrect on several counts. Syntactically, the Hebrew of 1:1 is not an independent sentence. It is an introductory clause, as reflected in "when" of the NRSV's "in the beginning," when God created the heavens and the earth, or in the NJPS's "when God began to create heaven and the earth." Nor does the opening verse describe creatio ex nihilo, creation of nothing, although this idea became prominent in Christian and some Jewish thought at later times. The Hebrew term for create, bara, which in the scriptures of Israel is only predicated of God, does not mean to create something from nothing. It means to create as only God can create. It also carries the connotation of to separate and to indicate, and so indicates how God brings order to chaos. This concern for separation and organization typifies the priestly worldview, where every created item belongs to a clearly delineated category. And then it goes in and explains the difference between the two accounts. So I don't read Hebrew. Mark C. Bretler does, and so does A.J. Levine. I don't know Greek, but they do. And so I have to look for other source material, but that's a pretty common consensus amongst most scholars of the text that
Right, but I never said that text says that he created ex nihilo.
no, you're referring to the Greek as doing that.
Right.
Right. And
Well,
that would right. And again, the Greek in those texts doesn't either. I'd have to pull quotes. I don't have those available right now, but the the understanding in the Greek is also similar to what they describe.
well, let me help. Let me maybe say this helps. Do you believe everything that exists was created?
I believe everything that exists was formed and organized. God is the one who did so. But do I think that
So,
God blinked things into existence out of nothing? No.
okay. Um, he didn't blink, he spoke,
Well,
right?
whatever. However you want to say it. Yeah.
I mean, so you disagree. So God did not speak
Well,
and
he
things were
did, but in like for example in Genesis 1:1, in the
mhm.
beginning God created the heavens and the earth. What does that mean, the heavens and the earth?
The heavens and the earth.
Right.
What does it mean?
What's being indicated by the heavens and the earth in that
Well,
verse?
it's from further on as it goes on. It's actually probably referring to Earth's atmosphere and Earth's um, the formation of the what we call Earth on the planet.
Right. And so yeah, he's not talking, and it's something I've talked to people who believe that he's actually talking about forming the earth and the heavens, meaning everything that we see in the celestial
Well, he
world
does breathe
above the
out.
earth.
He does. He does. Uh, in different accounts, it refers to him breathing out the stars or speaking the stars into existence. So it's a or creation of the moon and the sun, right? So you have celestial bodies that are being created by God, spoken, and some of those are made of, you know, well, gases, metal, you know, earth, and the indication there is he is, if you will, the when it talks about the creation of the heavens and the earth, he's actually referring to all of it as a sort of a thesis statement in Genesis, and then he goes on and we learn more detail as to how he did these things. So basically, all of what we know, God created, right? So, um,
Right. Except that in an ancient worldview, there wouldn't have been. That's the thing, is that would be anachronistic technically from the perspective that they have. So you've got an understanding that there's an Earth it's a flat Earth with a dome on top with light poking through, and a
sure.
dome of water on top, and so there's a firmament on top. The understanding that there could be other worlds or other planets that
Oh, of
exist
course,
outside
yeah,
of that,
they
they don't
wouldn't
have
have
that. So
known that,
all
right?
all Genesis could be referring to is, and it specifically translates. That's why she says it's the most mistranslated. Is in the beginning, God created the land and the sky. That would be a better translation of the text, because it's
So
talking about
not
this earth, not
well,
all things
maybe
that exist.
why, but not the sky, and of course, what we can see at night. Would you agree with that?
Right, but their understanding of stars. So, for example, Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 indicates he has no understanding of the cosmos because he believes the moon has light.
The oldest book in the Bible is Job. It it actually names star constellations that we still use today. The idea that we didn't know that stars, we didn't know they were gaseous, you
Right.
know,
Yeah, their understanding of
balls.
what yeah, they don't know what a star is. They don't know what the moon is. They don't really
Right.
understand the earth or the sun.
Sure. Yeah. And there's no way they could have. And it's not like the Bible's necessarily a science book. I
Yeah,
agree with
the
that.
people could study the designs and patterns of the lights and name them. Would I mean, certainly they could do that.
So when it comes to, for instance, this concept that, for instance, God didn't create everything. He only organized everything that we can recognize as being organized by God.
Right, and that's what we believe John chapter 1 verse 3 I think says. That
All
Christ
things,
brought all things that are seen are brought into a place where they can be seen
right?
and organized
And
by
then,
Christ.
of course, Colossians 1 says all things, whether thrones or dominions, things visible and invisible,
Right, but
right?
invisible just means unseen in the Greek.
Right. So, well, okay.
Like God exists, I
It
can't
means
see
that to
him,
me
but
too, right? So
yeah.
so in other words, but what you're saying, it's interesting because the what the this is different. This is a different way to look at it. I'm just understanding your way of looking at something like Colossians that seems to be getting to a point, and you're holding out a reservation for something that's not there. I mean, from what I can see, and maybe I'm misreading the way you're looking at it, but in Colossians, and I am going to confess that in 5 minutes, I have to pick up my son from the football field, but
No, you're perfectly fine.
I don't want to stop this. So if you guys were okay with a 15-minute intermission, I would be grateful for that. Okay. So Colossians 1:15 says, He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible, invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together.
Okay.
When I read all things, I come away and say that's everything.
But certainly can't be, right? Because he's not saying that he created God, not saying he created himself, not saying that he
Well,
created.
he puts himself as he's the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. So,
Right.
and then the
But that's
explanation
talking
is,
about the Father, who is an unseen God at this point.
um, see, that's okay.
Well, Jesus
I
is
mean,
the image of the
technically,
unseen God. But whatever God Jesus was praying to, that God's not seen by them.
Well, that's okay. I mean, I understand what you're trying to say in it. I'm just seeing invisible God, the unseen God,
Right.
right? No one has ever, Jesus says, no one's ever seen God but the
The
one who's
Father.
come from the Father,
Right.
right? So he's claiming to be exclusively the only one who's ever seen God. Okay.
Right.
And it's also saying that he is before all things. And when I'm reading all things, it says all things, for by him all things were created. Um, for by him all things were created. So in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers, authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he's before all things, and in him all things hold together. And the this is obviously the preeminence of Christ, right? This is who he is, and probably
Well,
the clear statement of who Christ is. Um, so if I'm reading all things and I'm just like, okay, all things, and you're like, well, all things organized by.
well, no, it says all things and it explains what all things are. All things that are the things within the earth.
Yeah, it says on
Again,
earth
again,
and in heaven, right?
you have to take the perspective of the audience. The audience isn't thinking
Of
that there's
course.
other worlds out there. There's Jupiter and
Uh,
Mars and Saturn, and there's grand
right. No, no, no.
galaxies that extend
I,
beyond. They have
I
no
didn't.
idea.
I certainly didn't say that. What they did know is everything that they saw, every blinking sky in the sky. Okay, light in the sky. When that says heavens, that didn't just mean the Earth's atmosphere necessarily. It also meant every star that they could see. This is clearly described in the Old Testament
Which to
over and
them are
over again.
just pinpoints of light in a dome
It doesn't matter what they
in a
think they
throne.
are, does it?
It, so if it doesn't matter what the context is, then I guess we can say whatever we want about the verse. So
Well, no, what I mean is it doesn't matter what they think the stars are, whether they think that they're
it
gaseous
does because
giants or
it puts the verse into context. I'm trying to think like the people that Paul's writing to is what I'm
okay,
saying.
so
I'm trying to
what
understand what they understood.
well, it doesn't matter just what they understood to me. It matters what it says because this is the written, we're both under the assumption this is the written word of God.
No, we're not.
So, oh, well, you don't
You're
believe this
you're
is the
under
written
that
word.
assumption. I'm not. I'm
Oh, you're not.
understanding that this is the written word of Paul, probably. I actually don't know
Interesting.
that Paul wrote Colossians.
Oh, okay. So okay, well, that's different. So yeah, there's really no reason to even talk about it. It doesn't really have any authority or bearing, right?
The biblical texts, they're texts. The authority that they have is what authority you give to them. They don't just
Well,
have authority just because they're the Bible.
that's interesting. So the
Why is that interesting?
well, because the Apostle Paul um, validated his authority as an apostle. So, for instance, Jesus, right? Jesus wasn't Messiah because people believed him to be, or Jesus didn't. He didn't say this is a subjective truth. You can believe it or not. I really hope you do believe that I'm Messiah. He validated that he was the Son of God by showing signs, wonders, and miracles, right? So he made that objective for them. He proved it. In fact, Deuteronomy 13 and 18 make a strong case for how you're going to test a prophet. They say, hey, if a prophet or seer comes to you, right, here's how you're going to test them. They got to be able to perform a sign,
Yeah, in
right, or
Deuteronomy
wonder.
18, yeah, there's no test of a prophet in Deuteronomy 18, but I don't, that would be a longer analysis than I really have time
Deuteronomy
for.
18, right? So
Yeah,
Deuteronomy is actually judging a false prophet, okay?
I
Judging Deuteronomy
understand.
18 saying if they come and give us they don't give a sign, to listen to them. Deuteronomy 13 says even if they give a sign, okay. So the point I'm just trying to make here is that there were clearly objective validation that you could give on whether or not somebody had the to be able to say just warrants it on the text whether this was true or not. The
Right. For
idea
example, in
that
Deuteronomy, yeah, and so like in Deuteronomy 18, for example, it's stating that if somebody teaches you to go after other gods, that you should kill them. And if they
that's
make a
13,
prophecy that doesn't come to pass, then you should ignore it.
right?
Don't be afraid of them. So those are the two provisions happening there, but it presupposes that the person coming to you is in fact a prophet. They just might be a prophet of a different god. And if they teach another god or they have you go after another god, then you're supposed to kill them because that causes them to betray Israel's God.
Correct. So in 13 even says that if they give a sign or a wonder, so God may, it says God is testing. So God may actually even give them the ability to do a sign or a wonder.
Or another god does. Because if they're coming in the name of another god and they perform a sign or wonder, presumably the god that they're a prophet for would be the one doing that.
Well, it says that God is testing you. So God is taking credit for the power exerted in the sign in Deuteronomy 13.
Okay.
But what that notion you're saying isn't, it's not in the text.
Okay.
So my point of both of these, whether it be the miracles that the apostles were doing or Jesus was doing, is that people didn't just come to truth. And this was kind of where I was hoping going to go anyway, validating the truth of what these apostles or what even Jesus was doing. They weren't validating them based on subjectivity. There was an objective, like proofs to validate what these people were saying in accordance to what is considered
what's an
right.
example of an objective truth that Paul would manifest?
Well, he raised someone from the dead.
Okay,
He said,
so the people that witness that would be an objective truth for them.
correct. Yeah. So, and then it's just like today, we don't all, when we're reading a science book, we don't all need to go in the laboratory and recheck all of what these people have said, right? We understand it's under peer review. We believe in that system and we accept it.
Right,
So
and
it's
that
the
would be
same.
faith. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it would be faith in the system, the scientific method, that we would be putting faith that they're not lying to us in these books, right? Um, so when it came to,
Particularly considering the authors of a lot of these texts aren't actually the people who are having experiences.
I don't know, like for instance, are you talking about Luke or the book of Acts when he's not there for some of those miracles and that sort of thing?
Well, we don't know necessarily that Luke wrote Acts or that John wrote John or that Matthew wrote Matthew or Mark wrote Mark.
Well, we know Luke wrote Acts. It
The
says that
author
Luke
of
wrote
Luke, the
Acts.
author of Luke wrote Acts, but we don't know that Luke wrote either of them. The same author wrote both texts, but we don't know that it was Luke
How do you not know that?
because the texts don't indicate who wrote them.
So um, that's
People can
interesting.
attribute an author to them
Right,
and make
right.
arguments for
So
that author, but that
okay,
doesn't mean
so
that that's the author.